Hi everybody and welcome. My name is Julie Mann. I am a professional network marketer. I'm also an actor and I'm an EFT practitioner. And today I'm really delighted because I'm joined by story coach and author Parul Banka. Hi Parul.
Hi, Julie. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's lovely to see you. So obviously you're all about telling stories, aren't you? So how about we start with your story? I know that you grew up in India. So yeah, start with telling us what it was like being a girl and yeah.
Being a girl in India, well, I would say it was an interesting experience because India is a highly patriarchal society. And so boys are considered, let's say, God's gift to mankind. That's how the social and the cultural fabric of the country is, by and large. And yet, I was this girl who was born after two boys. So I was the treasured child. Well, my brothers were also very treasured, but I was also very treasured to my parents. And therefore, although I grew up in a very patriarchal culture, and had certain expectations of me in how I should conduct and how I should look and what I should do and don't, although I had all those expectations that were placed on me, I was very fortunate and very lucky in the way that I was loved and cherished by my family, and there were no opportunities ever denied to me. I had access to exactly the same opportunities that were available to, let's say, boys in the family. So it was a very, very interesting experience for me because I experienced what I thought should be normal for everyone. And yet, in the world around me, that was not the norm.
So what were some of the challenges then, Parul, that you had to deal with when you were outside of the family?
Well, I would say that because India is a highly patriarchal culture, you always have to do more and be more to be seen and heard as a girl. And there are lots of times when people would just shoo you off, not really take you seriously enough because you are a girl. I think we have a fancier term for it now, which is something on lines of mansplaining. But a lot of times people won't really take you seriously, and I would say not just that, more than that, there are a lot of social expectations that are just part of the Indian culture. Now, with the wisdom that I have as an adult today, I understand that those expectations and those structures were put in place so that the community could thrive as a whole. But you know how things happen, Julie. Things get distorted, ideas get distorted over a period of generations, and a lot of those beautiful structures turned into restrictions. They turned into boundaries that they shouldn't have turned into, just because they were misinterpreted and distorted. For example, it's a very different thing growing up in India, and a lot of things are related to how you look because you should be desirable and marriageable, and you should get married at a certain age. And one of the biggest challenges, which I believe almost every Indian girl would go through, and women have gone through in the past, is when somebody gets married, then they are given away by their family and they become part of this new family, which is different from how it happens in the other countries. And when that happens, it's almost like cutting off ties. Well, not literally, but then you stop being part of your parents' family and you become part of this new family. So, as an adult, it's almost like being adopted into a new family. And the question is, how easy is it for people to facilitate that integration? We as adults know that that integration doesn't always happen, and just because somebody is getting married doesn't mean that those ties are being cut away completely. And I do feel that there are these expectations like these that just make the whole experience a lot harder, and a lot of people don't even think about it because, hey, that's just how things are.
Yeah. And were there friends that you had that had the same kind of philosophy as you did, or were they in that kind of traditional?
I would say I have both kinds of people in my life. There are some friends I have who have philosophies, life philosophies, like I do, and there are plenty of people who may not consider it okay, but they just play along with it. Well, I also play along with it. It's just that I'm very happy to adopt the other side and not give up my own.
So important, isn't it? Not giving up that sense of self.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
So
yes.
I know that you worked in, sorry, you're going to say something, Parul.
Yeah, I was saying this is just a social aspect, and the expectations that, for example, the home is the girl's responsibility, and if the girl has a career, which is a pretty common thing now, well, the home still remains her forte. So she has got to have both, whereas men can have just one. So it's not a fair division of responsibilities.
No,
No, it's
absolutely
not.
not. So I know that you worked in human resources, didn't you? You were an HR specialist. You were also a talent manager. Now I've got no idea what a talent manager is. Can you say more about that?
Okay, so human resources is all about people, and HR is very different in the Western world than it is in India. And I'm going to bring out this distinction because that's where I can also explain talent management. So here in the Western world, we see when we talk about HR, we talk a lot about the employment law, which is absolutely brilliant because I think it is really important to have the employment law that looks after people and the organizations and have that structure so that everybody is safe and we can achieve the most as employees and organizations. Now, we obviously have employment law in India as well, but the focus is not so high on employment law. It's a different culture. The litigation is not so much part of the organizational life or the life of the employees. There we have a huge focus on growing and retaining talent in the organization. So litigation is not something lots of employers worry about. I mean, you've obviously got to have the basics in place. And we always had the basics in place, but the main focus was how do you recruit talent, how do you grow that talent, and how do you retain that talent? And growing and retaining that talent in the organization because it's a competitive market and there are other organizations that people can move on to, and how do you keep them engaged while they're with you so that they are happy and productive employees. That is what talent management is.
Okay. So I know that you don't live in India now, you live in the UK. So what had you make that break from India to living in this country?
So we had a pretty good life in India, and we were doing well. When I say we, I am talking about my husband Abhishek and I. And we were both in corporate careers that we loved, and uh, and then we wanted more. We wanted to experience what it was like to live in a different country and experience the world, different cultures. And one of the things that came out of this desire was that my husband decided to do his second master's degree. We both have master's degrees. We have both done MBA in India, and that gave us flourishing careers there. But he decided to do a second MBA from an international university. And that's how he got into the University of Cambridge in the UK. And he joined University of Cambridge as a student. And I like to say I tagged along with him and came to this beautiful country.
And how did you find, that transition?
That transition was beautiful. That's the only word I can use to describe it. Now, it was the first time for either of us to live in a different country. Yes, we had heard about what it was like to live in a different country because my brothers had already left India, and we had friends who lived in different countries, but we hadn't experienced it for ourselves. So the first thing that I noticed was, well, we experienced was how different the infrastructure was because we lived in Mumbai, and Mumbai is a very busy and a very noisy place. And then we moved into this quiet neighborhood in Cambridge. And the quiet was just beautiful. Abhi used to say that at times he felt it was way too quiet, but I loved it.
Some people say the silence was deafening.
Yes, the silence was deafening, but I loved it.
Yeah. Now
I could,
sorry, Parul.
yes, so that was one thing. And how we were received in the community here, I think we we never felt as outsiders, or rather I should speak for myself. I never felt like an outsider, although I looked different, I ate different food, I had different habits, I came from a different culture, and yet I never felt like an outsider. And I think that was absolutely beautiful.
Do you think also, Parul, that had a lot to do with your attitude? But
I
you
would
were
say,
someone that, you know, is all about diversity and inclusivity.
I would say so, because it's both the parties that contribute to a situation, right? So if I were this insecure person who believed that the world was out to get me because I looked different and I had a different skin color, I would say my mind would look for that evidence and wallow in that evidence. And my experience of living here would be very different. In fact, before we moved here, we were warned by people that we may experience things like racism here. And these are things that had come from people who were well traveled, well educated, worked across different countries in the world. And they warned us that it may not be the same and we may be treated differently. And I listened to them and I said, well, I acknowledge that this is how you felt, but I would like to find it out for myself. And so I didn't take that opinion on board, really, Julie. And I am so happy that I didn't. I don't want to say that whatever they said was just a cooked up story. No, it is possible that that's what they experienced, but that's not what my experience was. I was loved, I was accepted. People were curious in a good way. People wanted to understand where I came from and why I said what I said, and what value it had in terms of my beliefs. And I think that was beautiful.
Brilliant. I think it's so, so important, isn't it, to actually just trust ourselves and to be curious rather than just taking on board what other people are saying. So I know that actually, I think it was 2013, you wrote a book called My Cancer Story, a
That's right.
rendezvous with myself. Interesting title. So
Yes.
what prompted you to write that? And what do you mean by a rendezvous with yourself?
Okay. So, the life that I described to you so far is what I called my pre cancer life. And it was a good life. I loved that life. I had consciously built that life through all the decisions I had taken. And for 2 years after I moved to the UK, that's the life I lived. I continued living that life, just in a different environment and in a different country. And and as I said, it was a life I loved. And that's how it continued until the week of my 34th birthday, when I was diagnosed with the most aggressive kind of breast cancer. And that's when my life changed. Now, you know that everybody who's touched by cancer, no pun intended, makes it out alive. And so, even though I had access to the best treatment here in the UK, I couldn't just assume that just because I have access to the best healthcare and the wonderful doctors and the healthcare that we have here, I would really get that second chance at life, because that's just how cancer is. That's just how it works. So I had to go through the process and find it out for myself. And while the actual treatment was a lot longer, we would find out whether I have the second chance at life or not in about, say, 6.5, 7 months, because that was the first leg of important treatment, the crisis management kind of time that we were in. And it was a period that was full of uncertainty. It was a period full of, we didn't know what would happen the next day. It was a very aggressive. It was a very painful period because the treatment itself was very aggressive. So not just what cancer was doing to my body, but also the treatment. And the tunnel just felt too dark and it felt too long. That's how I felt when I was in that time. And so, one thing that kept me going, one of the many things that kept me going, was this promise that I made to myself every single day that if I make it to the other side of cancer, which was the big goal that I was working towards, and my family were working towards along with me, and we were in it together. That if I make it to the other side of cancer, I would do everything in my power to live the rest of my life, no matter how long it is or short it is. And that's where the uncertainty was, as meaningfully and joyously as possible. Now, the experience was so intense that by the time I came out on the other side, and I'm very grateful that I came out on the other side because I understand not everybody makes it out alive, like I said to you a couple of minutes ago. That by the time I came out on the other side, I had changed as a person. I just started changing as a person. I wanted different things in life. I wanted the different things for myself. And some of those changes happened to me, and some of those changes came into my life because of the responses that I made to those changes. So, for example, how I looked changed. I was no longer the girl with the gorgeous hair. The hair was all gone. A very simple thing. How I looked physically, that completely changed. I started thinking in a different way. I changed mentally. I changed emotionally from being this practical person that I had taught myself to be. When I was going through cancer, I got in touch with my feelings again and began feeling and processing emotionally deeply once again. And that's how I was when I was about 10 years old. So I got in touch with myself emotionally. My relationships changed. There were lots of people who stood by me, and there were some who didn't, because that's just how things happen in life. And my financial situation, well, I just like to say it became a big joke. So you see, all the identities I had created for myself as a person through education and through work, and this is the amount of money I should have, and this is the way I should look, and this is how my relationships should be, and this is how I respond to a life situation. All of those identities were stripped away. And so I started turning into someone new. And I would say what really happened in this process is that all the stories and identities I had acquired during 34 years of my life, 34 and a bit more, they started unraveling. And I started unbecoming those stories. And that is where my journey to get back to who I really was started. And so it was a great opportunity for me to meet myself again. And I say that because I was a particular kind of person when I was little, and then I grew up and I began adulting and I became someone else. But cancer was the opportunity for me to pause and come off that autopilot mode and start living consciously. And that is why when I captured my experience of going through cancer and coming out on the other side and rebuilding my life after cancer, I called it a rendezvous with myself because I happened to meet Parul after about, what, 25 years, maybe more than 20 years. And that is why my book is called My Cancer Journey, a Rendezvous with Myself.
Wow. And I guess that on a day-to-day basis, you are meeting, a new Parul, aren't you? Because that's what happens. We grow and yeah.
Yeah, I would say I have gone back to myself, and that is why I believe that every story is essentially a story of coming home to ourselves. And that's what my story has been too. There can be different stimuli, there can be different life experiences, things that happen that prompt this kind of change. In my case, it was cancer. And yeah, it facilitated a rendezvous with myself.
Mm. So that leads us nicely on to the work that you do, Parul, which is obviously helping coaches. Now, you say that you help coaches who suck being visible and selling show up through their soulful story. So, if people watching who've got no idea what a soulful story is, can you say more about that?
Yeah, so I help my fellow coaches find, own, and share their stories in a way that feels right for them, in a way that feels safe for them, and in a way that helps them establish that human to human connection with their audience. And that's where the word soulful comes in, because it is not a in the head connection that we are trying to make, that, oh, look at me, I'm this clever person who has been through this, da 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 da, come out on the other side. That's one way to do things. And the second way to do things is just to reach out, open your heart, and be the vulnerable person you are. Let your walls down and let those people come into your life through your story. And that's the approach I take. So I help people find their story, and I say find the story because everybody has a story. And it is within us, because our story is nothing but a sum total of the life that we have lived. So it's not that we create a story. I help people find that story because a lot of people don't even know what that story is. And then the second step is I help them own that story, because if we don't own that story, we would never do anything with it, because not owning our story will always get in our way of using it. And then the third step is I help them share that story in a way that makes sense to their audience. And that's where we get into how to write a great story and how to deliver a great story. So that's the writing and the speaking, the skills based part. But that's the final step. Before that, we've got to find that story, we've got to own that story.
I love that. So I have heard a saying many times that is facts tell, stories, no, facts sell. No, hang on, I've got that wrong, haven't I? It's facts tell and stories tell.
Yeah.
Not that hard, is it? So can you expand on why that is, why that is the case?
So facts tell, stories sell. And that's absolutely true. And that is true, Julie, because we human beings connect through stories. when, well, many years ago, in the beginning of the civilization, through stories, wisdom was passed on from the elderly to the younger people in the communities. And that's how, since then, human beings have connected and learned from other human beings through stories. And the way stories operate are they connect human beings to one another. So if we look at the use of stories in, say, context of building a business, one way of building a business, well, let me take my own example to illustrate this, is to say, well, I am a coach, I'm a story coach, and this is what my qualifications are, and this is what I do, and this is how I can get you from point A to point B. Is that a way that works? Well, absolutely it works, because you are talking about, you're building your credibility in the process, and you are telling how you can help people get from point A to point B. I just feel it's the harder way to do things. And it's the harder way to do things because there can be so many other people in the world, and there must be, who have similar qualifications and who follow a certain process to get people from point A to point B. Whereas when I say, this is what my story is and this is what my journey is, what I do is I don't bring all those qualifications and what I can do as far as the transformation for the client is concerned yet. I reach out to that human who is behind that prospect or that client or that potential person I would work with. And once I have that human to human connection, that's when we talk about business. Because people don't just buy products, ideas, and services. they buy those products, ideas, and services from people they know, like, and trust. When I invest in a coach for myself, I don't just go and work with somebody random. I choose somebody who I understand, who I connect with, who I know of, who I've been following for a while. And stories help us build that connection very, very strongly. I read some stats a while ago, and it said that when you reframe the same message through a story, so instead of just giving factual information, when you reframe it through a story, it is 22 times more effective.
And interesting. Yeah.
And interesting, yes.
Because
And it stays with us.
dull.
Yeah. And it stays with people.
Yeah.
So you have to say the same thing not as many times, because stories will make it more effective.
Yeah. And we need the facts to back it up, but actually people are dying for connection, aren't they? It's all about relationships and everything.
Exactly.
You know,
We live in a world where a lot of information is free and it's available at the click of a mouse. You want to learn a yoga pose, you go to YouTube and just Google it. And I took that example because that's what I was doing yesterday, trying to improve a pose. Went to YouTube, looked for it, how to da 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 da. So information, a lot of information is available, but not enough connection is available. So if we were to focus on information, it is going to work. It's just the harder way to do things, because what people are really vying for, yearning for, is connection. And when we use our story, we are able to connect with people, and our stories are unique. And I would say that's a huge power that our stories bring in, because hey, there could be millions of people in the world who, let's say, go through cancer, but my experience of it and how I responded to it was unique to myself, and the decisions that I took on the back of it were unique to me. In the year 2018, there were 17 million new cases of cancer that were officially documented. And we aren't talking about people who were already living with and beyond cancer and the families who were impacted because of cancer. And yet, whenever I share my cancer story, it makes sense to people who listen to it. So it can still be a shared experience, but how you went through that experience and what you made of it, what your interpretation was of it, that's what is going to frame your story. And I think that's going to be unique. And when we bring that into our work, we just don't have to worry about the competition, because only one person can be yourself, and that's you.
Yeah, I love that. So if there are people watching, Peril, and they actually suck at being visible and they suck at selling themselves, have you got any simple tips that perhaps they could, put into practice and start to change something?
Like I said, yes, you can compete on the basis of what you can do for your clients, but I would say that invest time, effort, and energy into building that human to human connection. A very simple example, Julie, is you connect with people on LinkedIn and they would straight away follow in, literally within 2 minutes, with a sales pitch. Now, I don't mind receiving sales pitches. It's just that I think they don't really work. You don't even know people, you don't have a connection with them, you don't even know what they need. There are people who have written to me, oh, we think you'll be a great fit for our program. Well, that might be true, but you haven't even spoken to me. So you don't really know what I need. If people can just spend some time building that connection with other people, it's going to take them much further. It may not result into business in terms of exchange of money immediately, but at some point in time, it would. And one of the easiest ways to build that connection is through stories. And story is something that you have within yourself. So instead of just saying, uh, here is a practical example that you can use. So if you, let's say you want to talk about fear, and you want to talk about how fear can get in our way and how people can work past it. One of the ways is to take the concept and say, in a very training kind of format, 1, 2, 3, 4 things that this is what you can do. Or you can take that concept and say, this is my experience of it, and this is what I did. So you still share exactly the same information, but you share it through your story. And because it's your story, it's going to be more memorable. It's going to help you connect with other people, because when you do that, there are people who would go, I do that too. Oh, that makes sense. Oh, if I were to work with this person, she's going to get me. Oh, she's been there. And so people are going to find threads of their own stories in your story. And so invest time in building those relationships and connection and just see the magic unfold.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, me being an actor, I'm telling other people's stories. But, people love stories. You're totally right. So what kind of people do you actually work with, Parul?
I primarily work with coaches. That's what my audience is. And I help these coaches become more visible. And that's why I say people who think that they suck at selling, I help those people become more visible by finding, owning, and sharing their stories. So I would say storytelling and speaking are two really powerful tools that I use to help them achieve a bigger objective, that is to be seen and heard by a wider audience. And I do that because a lot of coaches are brilliant at coaching. So it's not coaching that I help them with. No, they already have those skills. I help them become visible and help them take their work to the client so that they can have that impact that they wanted, which is one of the key reasons why a lot of people become coaches, and really get compensated for that, really generate an income in the process for themselves, because everybody deserves that lucrative and that lucrative business. Everybody deserves to have the income.
Brilliant. And how would someone find out more about you, Parul?
People just have to go to Facebook or LinkedIn. There is no way that you can miss me on LinkedIn or Facebook. So you can find me on either of the places. You can find me through my website, www.caramelcoaching.com. Caramel that we eat.
Love it.
Caramelcoaching.com, or you can write to me on my email, Parul Banka at caramelcoaching.com.
Brilliant. I know you have a big purpose. Do you want to tell us what it is?
Well, my big purpose is to help people be seen and heard through the power of their personal stories. That's what my big purpose is. And I am at the moment working on it by helping my fellow coaches shine and become more visible, because I believe that when I'm going to help my fellow coaches become visible and do what they've got to do, create that impact, it's going to create a ripple effect, because then they will be able to serve their clients more powerfully. And together, we are going to build this huge ripple effect in the world.
Love it. If you could be remembered for anything, Parul, what would you want to be remembered for?
In my life?
Yeah.
Oh, so what's my legacy?
Yeah.
That's what we are talking about. I would like to be remembered for being a person who chose love.
Wow. That's so powerful.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to say before we close?
Well, I would say that if there is one thing that I could say to anybody who's watching this video, I would say your story is powerful. It may not change the entire world, but it has power to change one person's entire world. So go ahead and share your story.
Wonderful. Parul Banka, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you for having me.